Hello, and welcome to today's panel on embracing change while keeping your team focused. We're excited to get to the conversation, but have a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The sound for today's presentation should come from your computer and not from a dial-in. If you run into any problems, please send a message using the Q&A box and we'll look into them. Refreshing your browser and rejoining the session fixes most problems. We will answer questions towards the end of today's presentation. To submit your question, click on the question mark icon on the right side of your screen. And yes, we're recording and we'll share the recording with everyone here in the next few days. So after a tumultuous year, it's time to look forward. In this panel discussion, we'll dive into how 2020 has shifted the trajectory of technology, the emerging technologies that shouldn't be ignored in 2020 have and will change in the coming times. Now today I have with me Dan Pupias, co-founder and CEO at Range, Jenny Ravi, co-founder at Lunicorn and Pluralsight author, and Scott Lewis, co-founder and VP of engineering at APIO, and Shelly Benoff, Sitecore MVP and Pluralsight author. And today we're going to talk about some of the new things coming from 2020 and what we should look for looking forward into 2021. So how is everybody today?
Good.
Great.
Be here.
Awesome. So for my first question, and this one is for Janani and Dan, how did COVID change the trajectory of technology, accelerate it, or both?
I think the one thing we've learned from the events of 2020 is that things change slowly. They seem not to be urgent, and then suddenly they change all at once. So I think there are certainly some aspects that have been accelerated a lot, a shift towards cloud computing and a shift towards online-centric business models. This, I think, is true across the world. That's a trend that has accelerated. On the other hand, I feel that this year, national boundaries have started to matter a lot. There's a lot more talk about deglobalization, even if that term isn't really being used. Suddenly, it matters a lot where your data is stored. Where does your capital come from? Where do your investors sit, right? It matters where your teams are physically located, because teams that are close to one another tend to work better together if they're in the same time zone and so on. So it might start to matter a lot where your partners and vendors live as well. So it's just a matter of expanding where is everything, and that kind of expands out. I feel there's much more regulatory overhang over how businesses are run, whether it's like TikTok in the US or in India, and suspended IPO from just a few days ago. And the actual impact of these events will take some time to play out. So in short, the trends that have been accelerated, I don't think it's controversial. Cloud computing has emerged as a clear winner, because as a small business or even as an enterprise, I'm not really keen to invest huge amounts of money in terms of infrastructure when the business environment is so uncertain, when I need to kind of be very flexible about what I need to do. The speed of changes has been unsettling. Right? March and April were really depressed, and then there is, at least where I sit, a major recovery. So it's not clear how much infrastructure I need, what exactly I need. So I think cloud computing has been the big winner there.
Absolutely. And Dan?
Yeah, so I think I have a slightly bit of a different take. At Range, we're really focused on how teams work together and what it takes to build effective teams. So that's the lens that we bring to the world. And what I'd like to talk about initially, and maybe like frame some of the future discussion, is that technology is the practical application of knowledge. It's not just software. It's not just bits and hardware and software. It's actually so you can look at how we work together as technology in itself. And if you look back into the early 20th century, scientific management is a technology around how to create productive production lines. And Henry Ford actually invented the 5-day work week in the 1920s to increase productivity. So we look at the work week as a technology that's shifting and actually has been affected by the COVID virus, because you have people at home with kids, you have people who just have these massive logistical needs and aren't able to work in the same way that they worked before. So that's one of the things we think about, is the technology of how we actually work together. And I encourage people to look at their processes and then think of software as essentially ways of facilitating those processes versus being the means to the end instead of the end in and of itself. So that's how I would like people to start thinking about this.
Awesome. And is there anything anyone else wants to add to that? Okay. For our next question, what has changed in terms of the general public's technology expectations over the past year, and how do we take those learnings into 2021?
Yeah, so I guess this goes back to my lens on the world, and it's how we work together. And if you think about teams as being co-located in the office, there's a lot of ad hoc interactions which people use to facilitate work processes. So now that everyone is essentially remote for probably the remainder of this year and into next year, those ad hoc processes no longer work. So people have now expectations around how they interact with each other, how they communicate. And two obvious, really obvious ones are asynchronous communication and video. Everyone is, all interactions now on video, and then there's a lot of focus on asynchronous communication, and then building intention around how people interact with each other, because those informal processes that happened in person are no longer available. So if you don't intentionally design new processes to replace them, you end up with information silos forming, and people just not being in the loop about that, what they're working on. So I think that's going to continue into 2021. I think the other big trend that we're seeing is increased focus on wellness and belonging and mental health, and thinking of those actually in the context of work instead of separate programs that are outside the context of work. So how do you integrate wellness programs into the work stream and into people's work practices? And I think that will become much more of a trend next year.
I think building on what Dan said, everyone's at home and there's no separation between work and home anymore. Right? Everyone's got kids at home. E-learning seems more natural now than it ever did before, right? Given all the circumstances, yeah, you're learning, your school is online. That's totally normal, which it wasn't, right? You wouldn't imagine this a year ago. I feel everyone's signing into meetings from home. That's okay. We've done this in the past, but now security and cyber attacks and malicious actors, now they become much, much more important. They were important concerns in 2019, mind you. None of this was considered not important, but now they've become urgent as well. I think what I see here, there is, of course, the aspect of mental health that Dan mentioned, but at the same time, I see around me where I sit here in Bangalore, which is like the IT center of India, there's an incredible sense of worry among mid-career professionals. They worry whether their skills are relevant anymore and what skill is it that they need to develop and whether they can do it at all at this point in time. So these worries are not new. They've existed for 10, 20 years. But in the first half of 2020, I feel like software companies here really took a good hard look at who they're going to invest in and what they're going to invest in. And a lot of mid-career professionals found that they're not on these lists. So they need to retool for a completely different next couple of decades. And that's worrisome.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I think can I just one follow on is like another trend in the US. So as the pandemic gets cleaned up next year, maybe, or the year after, people will start returning to the offices. But overwhelmingly, we've seen that the cat's out the bag, and a large portion of people will want to continue working remotely part of the time. So many people want to return to the office. They just don't want to return to the office 5 days a week. So we need to figure out hybrid work models. So you'll start to hear more about default digital or virtual by default as the way of collaborating with your team, regardless of where people are located. So that might be that some people in the office, some people in different time zones, or some people just prefer to work at home a couple of days a week.
yeah, absolutely. Because and it depends on the job role and the personality of the person in that role. There are some people that I've talked to who are like, I'm more productive than I've ever been ever. This is the greatest thing. I never want to leave home. And I've also talked to people who are like, I cannot wait to get back to the office. I feel like I can't do my job anymore. I feel like I am going to die of loneliness or whatever. So yeah, I think coming up with those hybrid models is going to be one of the challenges once everybody starts returning.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen in some of the data is that junior roles tend to be less productive. And I think that's primarily not because they're junior, but because the support structures aren't in place. The support structures depended on co-located teams and senior people observing through the cube. So as we approach these problems, we'll come up with new ways of supporting people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in my experience, I've had mainly like developer positions, and I'm definitely the type of worker who would sit in an office with people with headphones on so that I could concentrate. So for me and a lot of developers, I think we prefer to work at home for pure productivity. Yeah.
I think one other thing we haven't really talked about, and one of the statistics, and I've seen it in a couple different places. I don't have the citations. I could maybe look those up, but security is becoming a much bigger issue. Phishing attacks, one report was saying that some of the analysis is that it's up 350%, which seems crazy that, it seemed like it was pretty high before the pandemic, but as the pandemic is waged on, we are leaving some of our corporate, we have VPNs and a few other things, but in order to enable us to do some of our jobs, we need to have access to local networks as well. And so security is becoming a much, much bigger issue, especially if you're in finance, healthcare, when you're dealing with anything that you might now need to have PII, or not necessarily on your machine, but have access to it through some kind of means. Security was something that I think that we're going to have to see really increase in order to keep the pace that we are right today without having some major catastrophic issues going on in some of our workplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. So my next question is for Shelley. What are some predictions about where technology will shift the most in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, I think that is a very important question. This year has impacted us like no other. There are many different technologies that have emerged this year. We've already touched on remote work tooling, and then also security. I've also seen trends, especially for data science and crunching the numbers from this pandemic. I actually work with Johns Hopkins currently, so we've seen a lot of trends with machine learning, and then also artificial intelligence as well, to help crunch all of those numbers and to automate a lot of the manual processes in, statistics and math, especially.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have anything to add? Some predictions about where technology will shift?
I think this is a trend which has existed once again in the past, and it's just going to be much more important. The future is no code and low code tools, essentially the democratization of technology. People have data to work with, people need to work with data, but having that barrier of someone who knows how to code to be able to actually see what this data has, I think that barrier is just going to be lowered. So there can be no code solutions for building business workflows, no drag and drop tools for machine learning or visualization data. These are just going to be much, much more important for a business and how they operate. There are just way too many use cases, and it no longer makes sense to, for access to these capabilities to be restricted or gated by technologists, right? It's not that you have to know Java, you have to know Python or any kind of coding to technologies. HR professionals, finance professionals, analysts, operations professionals, all of them will need access to these technologies, be able to visualize data, build workflows, and run their businesses.
I think some other areas we haven't really talked about is we've talked about how workers and how us tech people are doing these things, but we really haven't explored a little bit about, how the average or just, everybody is dealing with their normal lives. I mean, you think about, like Fortnite and how they had a concert in platform, and I think that, people are having to reinvent a lot of things, even necessary things. Obviously, education. I think we did talk about that one. Jen talked about that earlier, and that's been completely reinvented. But things like telemedicine, and being able to, not only, deal with your, healthcare providers, but other types of people. Counseling is also moved online. And how do we effectively, make those experiences? Zoom's great, and these other technologies like Teams and everything, all the what do you call them, virtual meeting platforms. But I think there's other things that need to happen that you were able to accomplish while you're in an office with somebody. Specifically, you think about medicine, where they need other instrumentation possibly to be able to be there. And I think those are not, those are the obvious first ones. But we also now think about entertainment, and the lack of being able to get together. And I think those are the immediate needs. But also, many of us have friends and family that are in various locations and can't always get together. And I think there's going to be things that we need to kind of come up with. And some things have done that to kind of build community, not only in teams of workers, but families, friends, and just to kind of keep the mental health up of people so that we don't feel so isolated all the time.
Yeah, excellent point, Scott. I think that one major trend that we're seeing explode right now is trying to take personal experiences online, and just like you said, have that human connection, because we are social animals and we need a group to chat with and all of that. And I think that right now, Zoom is the primary tool, at least for my family. But it still feels a little, impersonal. So maybe trends in making these online experiences more entertaining, more accessible, and more personal.
And I think from a technologist point of view, as an engineer, I was the same way you were, Shelley, where I had, if I was writing code or figuring out a problem, I had headphones on, and, I don't want to hear anybody, just kind of want to zone in. However, there was another element that was also super important, the water cooler chat, where I would go into the break room and there would be other technologists there talking about what they're doing. And they're like, oh, we're trying to get all these containers together and trying to get the server. And then I would jump in with some advice to help, and vice versa. I would be talking about, I'm struggling with X, with somebody, and then someone else would walk in and say, oh, I worked with that last year. And that water cooler chat relating to tech was super helpful. And I'm wondering if there's a deficit with that now, to where you're not going to stumble upon some hallway conversation that might solve your problem.
I think that's absolutely the case. And I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about informal practices. So there's all these things that you do that create a sense of belonging and understanding of who you're working with, and then also information flow. And I think what is an interesting realization for me a few years ago was that those processes are inherently not inclusive processes, because not everyone feels comfortable talking to everyone in the micro kitchen, and not everyone will have those natural conversations. So those conversations tend to flow through traditional power structures or traditional implicit bias. So I think one of the interesting things about remote work is that because you don't have any of those informal interactions, you have to be more intentional about how people cultivate belonging and how information flows. And one of the interesting side effects of that is if you do that well, it actually ends up being more inclusive. So more people have access to the information that they need to do their job well. More people feel connected with their whole team. So I think that's like the positive side. But honestly, but obviously in the negative side, until you intentionally create those processes for building belonging and information flow and connection, people will feel a deficit and they'll feel disconnected, and that will decrease their cognitive functioning. And that cognitive function will lead to tension and conflict and disengagement. And that's not how you get, that's not how you have highly creative, highly productive teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So for my next question, this one's for Jenny. How should other tech leaders be thinking about their own tech stack and strategy?
Sorry, I was on mute. So I think in the past few years, maybe from 2016 till about 2019, I think that's where we saw the peak. We saw peak Python, if you will. Everyone was learning Python. Everyone was prototyping these cool little machine learning models, building notebooks, projects, which were, which gave instant gratification, right? You were happy to see your models work, and it was very good, and it's great learning. Then I think eventually over the last few years, realization started to dawn that these prototypes were great as far as they went, but there's a gap when you attempt to take something from these prototypes out to production. So I think resolving that gap between the promise of ML and AI, what it has to offer, and what data can do, and the reality of turning that into a monetizable competitive advantage, I think that's going to be pretty important, and that's what a lot of companies are going to be thinking of, and that's what engineering leaders are going to be thinking of. So as far as tech leaders go, I think I have two specific thoughts. One is, of course, something I mentioned earlier. I'll mention that second, the no code, low code option. As far as their engineers go, they want their ML and AI models out to production. So productionize code, really aim for robustness, go into the details of your cloud deployments. Are your network set up right? Will they mitigate attacks? Have you covered all the basics before you do the cool stuff? Right? Have your ETL pipelines been set up right? Are you cleaning your data correctly? I think the nitty gritty is going to be much more important, because that's where all like the slip ups come from, the security concerns all come from this, right? Are your tables indexed? Everything. Then I think big picture, the technology needs to be available to people, non-technologists, people who don't code, right? Because they have the insights into, they're able to work on the insights that they get from data, but if they're not able to extract those insights, then you're missing something as an organization, right? Tech leaders need to be able to put the ability of prototyping and experimenting in the hands of the non-tech rank and file. They need to be empowered. So lots of tech training for non-tech professionals, understanding data, understanding statistics, using democratized ML technologies, no code and low code technologies, lots of retraining of mid-level professionals to work with cloud-based solutions. I think this is what tech leaders should be thinking of.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that folks don't quite talk about as much. A lot of the technologists that I speak with have talked about the accelerating moving things to the cloud. They were like, we were trying to kind of go hybrid and move things, and then all of a sudden now we've got to push everything to the cloud, and this is, crazy and hard and everything else. But what I think people don't talk about is how about for everybody else who aren't technologists, who now suddenly have to learn how to use things in the cloud. I think there's some impact there that maybe technologists are slightly aware of, but maybe not thinking at the forefront. Like, how is this affecting everybody who's non-technical in the organization?
Yep. And I saw something in the Q&A which spoke of, if you have all these democratized technologies, I mean, does it mean fewer jobs for people who program? Not really, because the number of jobs is just expanding in this particular phase. So you'll just move on to building more robust models. As engineers, we'll move on to making sure everything is set up right. We have good deployments, and our ML models actually do something useful for the organization.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I think one other thing that we need to talk about. So, in reality, our economics are based on business, right? And so largely, when you look at some research that's done by Harvard Business Review to talk about, how companies are, thrive outside, obviously most don't thrive in a down economy. And I think COVID-19 and the pandemic, if you talk to economists at big banks and other institutions, they kind of believe that, we have only seen the tip of the iceberg thus far on what's going to be happening, with the stimulus and all that kind of stuff kind of waning. We don't know what's going to happen next year with, United States as well as other countries. And so they did a study and they've looked at, how do companies come out of recessions or down economies in a good fashion? And they started looking at job postings. And interestingly enough, the trend during these times is to up level the job postings. So they, positions who were heretofore, required certain things during downturns, they actually increase the amount of requirements that people get. And there's some theories behind that. Maybe they don't want a lot of applicants because there's a lot of applicants to jobs, but when it comes down to it, essentially what that tends to tell the Harvard economists and our economists and our national level is that the companies who invest in not too much. A lot of companies will lay off people to try to make the system work, to save the jobs that are remaining and try to hold on. Other companies will hold on and invest in capital. And they found that both those ends of the spectrum, the companies coming out of the recessions don't do as well. And it's the people who do the right amount inside of that window that come out of it in a much better fashion. And the main thing to take away there is that what's happening during that is automation. And so people are looking, how do you cut costs without laying people off? How do you do more with less? Those kind of paradigms. And a lot of that comes down to a lot of things that people have been talking about. We're emerging in AI, we're emerging in ML, we're emerging in so many technologies that can take over certain tasks that are really problematic and difficult. I think one that here in the United States that we wish we had is automatic signature verification for, the current situation we have with voting and making that quicker. But despite that, every company has inefficiencies that now, we've done the easy things, mechanizing, various parts of our business. But now we need to get into, taking the higher, more difficult tasks on and, applying the stuff that we've been only really theoretically doing. And I think the companies who do that and the platforms that enable that will help people come out of the downturn economy and come out of it in a better fashion.
So do you think that will shift priority stronger to automation? Because during good times, automation is kind of a nice to have, right? Like, this is cool, this is fun, or this is enabling me to build other things because now I don't have to do this. But from what you're saying, now the shift is we need this for the company to survive. I think that changes the priorities and changes the way people think about it pretty drastically.
Definitely. If you read the three papers, there's one in 2010 from Harvard Business Review. There was another one in 2019 before, obviously, both of those are looking at the post Great Recession here in the United States, situation and how companies fared. They categorized each one and what they did and how they came out of, the ones that really came out like a rocket ship out of the downturn, did certain things, and other ones, it took pretty bad downturns. One of them was Honeywell, believe it or not. They're a pretty big company, but they came out of one recession terribly. The next recession in the early 2000s, they came out of the next recession and, and like a rocket ship. What was different? And I think the third one was a scholarly paper by our Bureau of, I think it's economics. I don't remember the name of it is, and theirs was the same thing, that most of the job postings that were going on during those times were for automation type purposes. And it seemed like the people that, didn't lay off too much, but invested in the right things, and that generally from the job postings looked like automation techniques. They came out of it and were more apt to succeed after the fact. So
that's great. And Shelley or Dan, do you have anything to add to that? Have you seen increase in automation?
We mostly focus on knowledge work. So we see automation of simple labor, but in terms of knowledge work, we think of it as augmentation, and that's increasing people's effectiveness and ability. So I think it has a very different lens or flavor, but definitely looking at ways of augmenting rote work so people can have more mental bandwidth to focus on the creative, innovative work that is their specialty.
Yeah, I think that automation is good for more manual tasks, more repetitive tasks, right? To help just increase productivity in general. I think what you can't automate is really making a human decision, you know, because that's a very complex, nuanced process that has many variables. And I think that that type of thing requires human leadership, but we shouldn't shy away from automation in general, and it won't take all your jobs.
Yeah, that seems to be the biggest fear for the last 20 years and hasn't come true yet.
Yeah.
So this next question is for Dan. How are you thinking about value-based digital experiences, and has your view changed in 2020?
I don't think it's changed in 2020. I think it's been solidified. I mean, I think the way that I've always approached software is from a needs perspective. So what are the needs you're solving? And I think historically, enterprise software has been very like process oriented. So you have a process, and then you move that process into software without really, and then you lose sight of the underlying need that you're trying to solve. So maybe this is part of the consumerization of enterprise, is really focusing on the human need that you're trying to solve and the human interactions that you're facilitating or interacting with, and then that can permeate through the organization, through the software. So when people don't question that, say, Amazon changes your buying behavior, or Twitter changes your news consumption, or Facebook your voting behavior, but they often question that software can help organizations and how people work with each other. But I actually firmly believe that so many of the human processes are facilitated through software that there's a huge opportunity for software to actually shape our behavior and how we interact with each other in the workplace. And these are sometimes called nudges, but they can be more intentional and more like craftily designed to actually encourage better teamwork. So some of the things we're looking at Range is how can you integrate into these daily processes to actually cultivate vulnerability and belonging, which we know is precursors to psychological safety, which we know are necessary for effective teamwork, and how can the software nudge us to make better decisions? And again, people question like software's ability to do this, but when I was at Google, I was working on a project that was being used by a ton of different people across the company, and I'd get code reviews sent me all the time, and I was kind of I probably can't say this on TV, but I was a bastard. I was like not very nice to people because I would be like, God, they're sending me these horrible code reviews. So what I realized was I was not being a very nice person. So I'd go over to the team directory, look at a picture of them, see them as a human being, come back, and I'd be much more reasonable in the code review. So if we can humanize our colleagues and our workers, we can actually facilitate a lot of like higher bandwidth, higher functioning interactions, which can then lead to better collaboration. I think in many workplaces with faceless LDAP names, and we need to humanize each other.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And does anyone else have anything to add to that? Yeah, because that.
Apologies for swearing.
And yeah, I could absolutely see that in the code review process. Having done code reviews for many years, that's one of the things I imagine now today, where when I did code reviews, I would, send somebody a message and they'd walk over to my cube, or I would walk over their cube. So obviously I'm not going to look at it and be like, this is a bunch of garbage. And but if it's coming in online and I don't know this person, I might be more.
Yeah, you see this in online communities, right? All the stuff around Reddit and how toxic parts of Reddit can get. As more of our work systems are moved online and digital, where there's no human involvement, we risk bringing that into the workplace. And I think we already see that. with tensions forming, people not trusting each other. So we need to figure out how to inject humanity and remind each other that we're all on the same team.
Yeah, absolutely. So my next question is a more technical question, and this one's for Shelley. How can this reshape things like cloud migration and other plans for organizations, like for the technical roadmap?
I definitely think that organizations will see that working remotely, not going anywhere, obviously. So I think that it'll be really key for all companies to have the infrastructure and services in place for employees to collaborate regularly. And then also for devs to have a good, seamless way to push code out. I use Azure personally, so making sure that the pipelines and all of that are super secure, that everything is traveling on a correct path, all of that stuff. And just, ensuring that everybody in the company has access to all of the information in order to be productive. There are many tools out there. I just tapped my laptop, so it shook a little. There are tools like SharePoint is still a thing. It really is. And like Dropbox, any type of system where users can access documentation from literally any device, laptop, phone, anything, is really key to keep people productive just through information alone, and to make sure that there aren't silos, which we also touched on earlier. I actually have a course that teaches this, just that teams need to collaborate together. And obviously that's a lot harder online. So just having the access to all of that is a huge key.
Absolutely. So does anyone else have anything to add?
I think one of the things with people who went to remote unintentionally is that they didn't have the firewalls in place. So when everyone's in the office, the IT managers have much better control over what SaaS applications and how data is leaking out of the organization. So things like Beyond Corp are becoming necessary, not just nice to haves, for ensuring that you have control over your systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So my next question is for Scott, and you've touched on this a little bit, so I know you'll have a good answer, but what are the risks of a rapid shift in technology? And it sounds like you're on mute.
There we go. Hit the wrong key strokes. Yeah, so I think that one of the ones that we mentioned here, I think in our little preview, was anticipatory technology. And I think to talk about anticipatory technology, it's, when technology actually does things ahead of you asking for it. So for example, well, in the old days, it was just ads. Like you went to look at one, a shirt, and now everywhere I go on the internet, that shirt follows me around for the next 6 weeks, and that was really, to me, I mean, I think maybe some people like that, but I don't really like that. That to me is, too big brother. And I think there's to be unnamed, there are several big companies in the space that, one is you're the product, another is, privacy is most important. I'll leave that to the discussion of who wants to do that. I'm more in the camp of I like to have anticipatory technologies. I like to be, things to happen for me automatically, but I don't like to be the product. And I think that's one of the big problems is that, in business models where you don't pay anything and, you just show up and
are the product. And so I think that's an area where I think we really need to find ways to have
companies be able to do both. Not only, offer something, at a reasonable price, but yet still not be, where you're having to steal everything about them so that you can make your billions of dollars. And I think that's one area that we need to kind of think about is, as we do shift this technology, we need to make sure that we don't just lose everything about our person and about, I think the risks are great. Whether it be your religion, your race, your belief system, whatever that is, getting that into the hands of the wrong people at the wrong time, I think can be disastrous. And so I don't know how a good answer necessarily for it, but I think that's one of the big ones is that, we have to figure out better business models that can balance privacy and, economics.
Absolutely. And so my next question is for Jenny, which ties right into exactly what Scott just said. The struggle between the anticipatory experience and privacy concerns. What are some of your thoughts on that topic?
So actually, I think my thoughts are shaped very much by what I do and where exactly I sit. So I run a business here in Bangalore, India, and I'm pretty clear between anticipatory experience and privacy concerns right now. Where on the spectrum, what do I need on the spectrum is I need better experience from all the technologies that I use, right? And give me anticipatory experience that simplifies my life, and I'll take the hit on my privacy. But that's right now. It's so contextual. It depends on what you're doing and what you're struggling with every day. And there is, of course, a cultural aspect to this, right? How open are folks to culturally sharing details about themselves? What details are they comfortable about sharing? Like what you may be comfortable sharing, I may not be, and vice versa. And basically, I think the most important thing is how smooth is your current experience. So where I sit, I have so many little things that I have to worry about, which are very difficult, right? Little operational and bureaucratic matters. If I have to like do compliance or file taxes, just working with those sites is just so painful. Everything is a struggle. So anything that makes my life a little simpler, it's just worth it, right? Just for how much utility I derive from it, right? I'd like things to be simpler so I can just focus on doing my job. So once again, this also depends on what's happening in the world. Like views have moved significantly during COVID. Like a year ago, if you told me to go to a restaurant and sit down and just have a nice dinner, I have to install an app on my phone and then have that app record my temperature for a couple of days so it's tracking how I'm doing. I would have no, I would have been all like annoyed and I would have been bristling and shunned that restaurant forever. But I've done it. I've done it like a couple of times in the past few months, and it seems reasonable to me, right? Like my mind has changed, and it's just remarkable how things seem normal and strange things seem normal now, right? But now I'm very conscious that others might have a different perspective, because where things are a lot more smoother and you're giving up much more information which you may not want to, you're obviously concerned about privacy. In that sense, I'm concerned about privacy because I'm not on social media. I avoid using social media because I feel I don't want anyone to know anything about me, and I only use like person to person messages, which I feel are secure reasonably. So what I do and what I want is a little different. So that's where I lie right now.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. There's a lot of things that feel like an invasion of privacy, and when it's an invasion of privacy to sell you ads, it's an entirely different feeling than an invasion of privacy that keeps you safe or healthy. And so there's quite a bit of a difference between those two things and what you're working on. So my next question is for Dan. How have your thoughts and practices on security measures changed or not changed since 2020?
Yeah, again, I think much has changed here. And I don't have much to add on the technological side. I think, especially in terms of trust, it's really about setting up a relationship with your customers so that it's not adversarial. You have to come together and have a dialogue and talk about those things. And for example, Twitter is one of our customers, and they have a very rigid security stance for very good reasons due to the nature of the platform and their customers. So we have regular meetings with the IT team, and we just ask them, what do you need? What do you feel worried about? Like, how can we alleviate some of these tensions? And then it becomes a code development process, which ends up benefiting everyone. So I don't know. I think it's just you have to be resilient and adaptive, and make sure you have open lines of communication and good relationships, and then things will build on top of that.
Awesome. And Shelley, did you have anything to add to that with the increasing security concerns and how tech leaders can deliver the experience while maintaining trust?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very difficult. Security is a huge concern at the moment for many different people, from consumers to businesses to government. So I think that companies will need to really make sure that anybody who's connecting to their systems are connecting through a secure channel. So providing the VPNs, I personally have three different VPNs I use for completely different reasons. But for consumers, if you're doing any kind of banking online, please use a VPN. Don't just do an open channel. Have all your firewalls on and stuff like that. But yeah, for businesses, it's tough on so many levels. Also, just making sure your code is stored in a place that is not accessible by hackers and such is extremely important.
Yeah.
Actually, this year, sorry, did I interrupt someone? All right. This year, I'm thankful for all of those annoying things which are for the purposes of security. So, for example, online transactions, I'm doing so many more of them now. And I don't know how it's in the US right now. It's been a while since I was in the US. In online transactions in India, you can't proceed on any platform without a one-time password, like an OTP that's sent to your phone. So you have to keep your phone with you, and no bank transfer, nothing works without this OTP. So this was really annoying to me. It was very, very annoying to have to do this each time. And sometimes my network connectivity wasn't good and the OTP wouldn't show up, and it would take a few minutes and I would get annoyed, right? But frankly, this year, I've been thankful for them. There was a time back when we were locked down here very severely in India in April, and I was subject to a phishing attack. I almost fell prey to it. There was some kind of transaction, and I was just going to go ahead and make a payment when it suddenly struck me, where's the OTP? No OTP has shown up, right? Because it just comes, and then you kind of instinctively look for it, and it didn't show up. And I knew that, okay, this is not legit and I need to stop this right away, right? That split second saved me from like a very nasty situation. And if my card had gotten blocked in April, like I would have just been, struggling to figure out what's going on. I don't like cards blocked, and it's like a huge process. And in April, it would have been impossible with everyone locked down, right? So I feel the little security overhead, which the tax that you pay each time you do something, I feel it's been worth it. And I'm grateful for that this year.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you so much for bringing this up. I just wanted to say I'm currently working for a client whose security is ridiculous in a good way. In order for me to access any of their servers, even QA and things like that. I have to sign into VPN. Once I'm logged in, it texts me a code. Once I do that, I have to log into another page that again texts me a code, and then it produces a token. And so I copy the token and I paste it into my remote desktop, and then I can log into the server. It's measures like this that will absolutely ensure that your information is private and secure. A lot of this specific workflow is HIPAA related stuff, so then on top of all of this, devs cannot have access to patient information or anything. So it's just extremely private and secure.
Yeah, I think all this is becoming table stakes as vendors now. It used to be that you would only need these if you were serving Fortune 500 companies or health institutions, but we're seeing SOC 2 be a hard requirement for even 200-person companies, and 100-person companies sending us, a 20-page vendor assessment. So building security practices into the core of the company is super essential. And the earlier you do it, the easier. It's much harder to retrofit this once you have a 1,000-person organization. But we got SOC 2 when we were 3 people, and then layering the practices on top of that has been much easier.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Retrofitting is difficult. I made my living doing that at one time, retrofitting security things. And
speaking of automation.
Yeah, exactly. So I have one final question for everybody. What is one technology or methodology that you have your eyes on for 2021 that's just something that's recently really caught your interest, or just something that you see is really big that's on your radar and should be on everyone else's radar as well?
I feel like one thing that is a little political and contentious in the United States right now is 5G, because people are working from home. A lot of people aren't used to that. A lot of people don't have the actual access that they need at home. And whenever you're in a situation like we are now, I think that a lot of companies are looking heavily into infrastructure. And then also just at home, since people are using more bandwidth every day. I don't know about you guys, but at 9 a.m. every day, my bandwidth takes a dive when everybody's, logging into work and school. So I think that increasing the connection speeds is a huge thing.
Yeah.
My answer would be, it's not a new concept, but I think with the mass shift to remote work, zero trust networks will become much more mainstream. So Google's Beyond Corp and a plug for a friend's company, Tailscale, they're working on a mesh VPN, which will enable this. But I think that'll become essential in order to manage a remote workforce.
Awesome. And Scott or Jenny?
I think for me, sorry, I'll just
go ahead,
say
Jan.
I think for me, it's productivity tools for working from home. Just that needs all of that needs that increased bandwidth that Shelley was talking about, and of course you need secure tools like Beyond Corp, being able to plug in securely, but just additional productivity tools, just having your Zoom meetings or whatever you're using, Hangouts, whatever it is, working well, just bringing them all together so that it's not like I'm having a meeting with someone, but I'm having to email them separately, have them all in one place. I think that's going to be the big thing for 2021 at least.
Yeah, I haven't really seen any technologies that I'm really, can specifically talk to, but I can say a couple that I really want. One is a whiteboard. By the time I get my whiteboard, software and get everybody connected to it, I have lost all my desire to whiteboard, and I just give up. So I want to see a whiteboard that can just work right out of the box. And I want also that communicator thing where you on Star Trek, so that when I have just a quick thing, I'm like, hey, what do you guys think? It's without having to like go find my Slack app or my email or whatever. Right? Those are a couple of things that I think would really make my life a lot better as I work at home. And if anybody has access to some of those, type of technologies, I could really use those.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have my eye on a lot of applications that are going to improve the social experience and working, and psychological safety, like Dan mentioned, is huge. So anything that can help people communicate honestly and freely, and yeah, it's exciting stuff. Well, thank you all for joining me. Are there any final thoughts that anybody wants to share with the audience before we go?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as much of a struggle as we've had this year, there's always good that comes, and I see a lot of good technology innovation, especially, and it's expanding at such a rapid pace that it's an exciting time. It really is.
And does anyone else have anything they'd like to share? I did see one final question that came in here. Can Alexa connect to Slack and send messages? Does anybody know the answer to that one? Because I don't know offhand. I know Alexa has a great API, but
I'm sure you can do something with Zapier or if this then that. Or maybe one of the no-code solutions someone's talked about here.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all for doing this panel. I think this has been really interesting, really great discussion, and thank you for our audience for watching and participating in this. And yeah, thank you very much. Look forward to the year ahead. Keep our positive attitude, and the recording will be available probably sometime next week. I think it'll be available for this. So thank you all.
Cool. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Jeremy. Goodbye.
Bye.